The wind screamed across the frozen wasteland like a living thing trying to claw its way inside every crack and crevice it could find. Owen Briggs pulled his coat tighter and squinted through the ice particles that hit his face mask hard enough to leave scratches. The thermal regulation station sat another 100 meters ahead, its lights barely visible through the white chaos of the storm. This was the third breakdown this month. Something about Arctis 7 just ate through equipment faster than any other moon he had worked on. The cold went deeper here, found ways into sealed systems that should have been impossible. But that was the job. Keep the heat flowing to the mining operations, or everyone froze. Simple as that. His boots crunched through knee-deep snow as he approached the station entrance. The door controls were frozen solid again. Owen pulled out his plasma cutter and ran it along the seal until the ice melted enough for the manual override to work. The door groaned open and he stepped inside, shaking off the worst of the ice before it could melt and refreeze on the interior. The main corridor was dark except for emergency lighting. Power was definitely out in this section. Owen set his toolkit down and pulled out his scanner to check the fusion core. That was when he heard it. A soft scratching sound coming from near the heating vents. Rats. Had to be. Some species always found a way onto human facilities, no matter how careful the decontamination protocols were. He walked toward the sound, more annoyed than concerned. The scratching got louder, and then he heard something else. A high-pitched chirping noise that definitely did not sound like any rat he had ever encountered. Owen rounded the corner and stopped dead. Two small creatures huddled against the vent grating. They were barely the size of his forearm, covered in dark scales that should have gleamed but instead looked dull and lifeless. Wings hung limp at their sides, torn membranes showing through in several places. Their eyes opened when his light hit them. Bright amber eyes that held far too much awareness for simple animals, dragon hatchlings. Scarati, if he remembered the briefings correctly. The species the mining company had warned everyone to avoid at all costs. Dangerous predators. Kill on sight was the official policy in some sectors. These two did not look dangerous. They looked half-frozen and completely terrified. One of them reached out with a small clawed hand and tugged weakly at the edge of Owen's coat. The other made that chirping sound again, softer this time. Almost pleading. Owen knew the rules. Contamination protocols existed for good reasons. Introducing alien species into human facilities could cause all kinds of problems. Disease, aggressive behavior, ecological disruption. The list went on in the safety manuals he was supposed to have memorized. He looked at the hatchlings again. They were shaking so hard their scales rattled against each other. Frost had formed on their wings. Without heat, they would be dead in an hour. Maybe less. Owen made his decision in about 3 seconds. He pulled off his thermal coat and wrapped both hatchlings in it, bundling them up until only their heads poked out. They stopped shaking almost immediately, pressing against the retained warmth of the fabric. Their eyes closed and small rumbling sounds came from their throats. Not threatening, more like a cat purring. He picked up the bundle and carried it to the maintenance office. The room was small, but it had its own heating unit that was still functional. Owen set the wrapped hatchlings on his desk and turned the heat up as high as it would go. Then he went back to work. The fusion core needed a full diagnostic, and 2 of the primary conduits had stress fractures that required welding. Owen moved through the repairs with practiced efficiency, but he kept glancing back at the office. The hatchlings had not moved. They stayed wrapped in his coat, occasionally making those small rumbling sounds. After an hour, the station power came back online. Lights flickered on throughout the facility, and the main heating system kicked in with a low hum. Owen finished sealing the last conduit and cleaned his tools. Job done. Time to head back to the main colony. He walked into the office and found both hatchlings awake and watching him. They had worked their way partially out of the coat. When they saw him, they both chirped and scrambled toward the edge of the desk. Owen caught them before they could fall, and they immediately climbed up his arms to his shoulders, tiny claws digging into his shirt for grip. He tried to put them back down. They climbed right back up. He tried again. Same result. They seemed determined to stay as close to him as possible. Owen pulled up the colony communication system on his datapad. He should report this. Call in wildlife control. Follow proper procedures. His finger hovered over the send button. The hatchlings had settled on his shoulders, their small bodies warm against his neck. One of them yawned, showing tiny sharp teeth. The other tucked its head under Owen's chin and made that purring sound again. Owen closed the communication screen without sending anything. He would figure this out tomorrow. Right now, he had to finish the inspection reports and check the secondary systems. The hatchlings could stay with him for one night, just until he worked out what to do with them. He pulled his coat back on, carefully arranging it so the hatchlings were inside against his chest. They settled in immediately, going quiet and still. Owen picked up his toolkit and headed for the next section that needed maintenance. The storm was still raging outside, but the station was warm again. That was what mattered. Heat and power flowing like they should. Everything else was just details he would handle when the time came. The hatchlings tugged at his shirt from inside the coat. Owen adjusted the fabric to make sure they had enough air and kept walking. 5 days had passed since Owen found the hatchlings, and they showed no signs of leaving. Every morning he woke to find them curled against his chest, their scales warm and smooth under his hand. Every night they followed him through his quarters, chirping softly whenever he moved to a different room. He had named them simply because calling them the small one and the smaller one got confusing fast. Ash was slightly darker and had a torn left wing. Cinder was a shade lighter with a scar across her snout. They responded to the names within 2 days, turning their heads when he spoke. Owen told himself this was temporary. He would find their parents or contact a wildlife sanctuary, someone who actually knew how to care for Scarati young. But every time he sat down to make the call, one of them would climb into his lap or tug at his sleeve, and he would find another excuse to wait just one more day. The morning inspection routine had changed completely. Owen used to move through the thermal stations alone, checking gauges and running diagnostics in comfortable silence. Now Ash and Cinder went everywhere with him. He had fashioned a carrier from spare cargo netting and thermal fabric, wearing it across his chest like the pictures he had seen of parents with human babies. The hatchlings seemed to love it, poking their heads out to watch everything he did. Today's route took him to the Eastern Monitoring Station, where 3 pressure valves needed replacement. Owen set his toolkit down and pulled out the first valve assembly. Ash immediately hopped out of the carrier and landed on the workbench. She picked up a wrench with her small claws and held it toward Owen. Wrong size, but close. Owen took the wrench and showed her the correct one. Ash studied it for a moment, then retrieved it from a kit. This time she got it right. Cinder stayed in the carrier, but her eyes tracked every movement Owen made. When he dropped the bolt, she made a sharp clicking sound. Owen looked down and found the bolt right where her tail pointed. They were learning. Fast. Owen worked steadily, replacing valves and checking seals. The hatchlings helped in small ways. Ash retrieved tools. Cinder warned him twice when temperature readings spiked higher than normal. They seemed to have an instinct for heat signatures that his equipment could not match. That he was tightening the final valve when his communicator chimed. The colony manager's face appeared on the screen, and she did not look happy. Briggs, my office. Now, Owen looked at Ash and Cinder. They looked back at him with those bright amber eyes. Understood. On my way. The walk back to the main colony took 20 minutes. Owen kept the carrier hidden under his coat, but halfway there Cinder poked her head out to see where they were going. A passing technician did a double take, but said nothing. Manager Patricia Reeves was waiting in her office with the security feed pulled up on her wall screen. The footage showed Owen clear as day, walking through the thermal station with 2 dragon hatchlings riding in a homemade carrier. Sit down, Briggs. Owen sat. Ash and Cinder stayed quiet inside the carrier. Patricia leaned back in her chair and rubbed her temples. How long? 5 days. 5 days. 5 days you have been harboring prohibited wildlife in a regulated facility. She pulled up another screen. Do you know what the contamination protocols say about this? Yes, ma'am. Then you know I should terminate your employment immediately and have those creatures removed by force. Owen said nothing. There was nothing to say that would help. Patricia stared at him for a long moment. Then she sighed. Why, Briggs? You're one of my best engineers. Never caused problems. Never broke protocol. Why now? They were freezing to death. That happens out here. Nature is harsh. Not our responsibility. I know, but you brought them in anyway. Yes, ma'am. Patricia turned off the security feed and stood up. She walked to the window, overlooking the mining operations. Snow fell in thick sheets outside, covering everything in white. I am giving you 48 hours, she said finally. Find a proper facility for them. Wildlife sanctuary. Research station. Something. After that, if they're still here, I call in a removal team. Understood. Owen stood. Understood. Thank you. Do not thank me. Just fix this mess. Owen left the office and walked back to his quarters. Once inside, he let Ash and Cinder out of the carrier. They scrambled around the room, exploring corners they had already explored a dozen times before. He pulled up the Galactic Wildlife Database on his terminal and started searching. Sanctuaries, research facilities, conservation programs, anything that might take 2 dragon hatchlings. Most of the listings were automated responses. Some never answered at all. The ones that did respond said the same thing. Scarati were classified as dangerous predators. No facility would accept them without extensive documentation and quarantine procedures that would take months. Owen kept searching. He had 48 hours to find an answer. Ash climbed onto his desk and nudged his hand with her snout. Owen scratched under her chin absently, still reading through facility requirements. Cinder joined her sister, and both of them settled down next to the keyboard, watching the screen with him. The database had over 3,000 listings. Owen started working through them systematically, sending inquiry messages to every facility that might possibly help. Outside his window, the storm continued. Inside, 2 small dragons purred softly while their accidental guardians searched for a way to keep them safe. Out 48 hours was not much time. But Owen had solved harder problems with less. He would find something. He had to. Owen had been reading about Scarati biology for 6 hours straight when he found it. Buried in an old research paper from a xenobiologist who had studied the species 40 years ago. One paragraph that changed everything. Scarati hatchlings imprint on the first source of sustained warmth they encounter after hatching. The bond is permanent and cannot be transferred. Once formed, the hatchling considers that source to be their primary parent regardless of species. He read it 3 times to make sure he understood correctly. Then he looked at Ash and Cinder, who were sleeping in a pile of blankets on his bed. They thought he was their parent. Not temporarily. Not until something better came along. Forever. Owen closed the research file and sat back. 36 hours left of Patricia's deadline, and he had just discovered there was no solution. No facility would take them because they would not bond with handlers. No wildlife program could help because the hatchlings would never integrate with their own species now. They were his responsibility whether he had planned for it or not. His communicator buzzed. Message from the Galactic Wildlife Bureau. A team was available to collect the hatchlings tomorrow. They would be taken to a holding facility for evaluation and eventual placement. Owen knew what that meant. Evaluation was code for determining if they were dangerous. Placement meant either a zoo or euthanasia. Neither option was acceptable, that he deleted the message without responding. Movement outside his window caught his attention. Owen stood and walked closer to the glass. Something large circled in the distance, dark shapes against the gray storm clouds. Then another shape joined it. And another. Dragons. Adult Scarati, much bigger than Ash and Cinder. At least 5 of them flying in a wide pattern around the colony. Owen grabbed his binoculars and focused on the nearest one. It was massive, easily 4 times the size of a human. Wings that spanned 20 meters. Claws that could tear through steel. Every bit as dangerous as the safety briefings claimed, but they were not attacking. Just circling, calling out in low, rumbling voices that carried even through the insulated walls. Ash and Cinder woke up immediately. They scrambled to the window and pressed against the glass, making high-pitched answering calls. The adult dragons changed their flight pattern, moving closer to Owen's quarters. His communicator exploded with alerts. Security warnings. Emergency protocols activating. Patricia's face appeared on the screen. Briggs, we have a situation. Multiple hostile dragons approaching the facility. Get to the shelter immediately. They are not hostile. Owen said. What? The dragons. They are not attacking. They are looking for something. Patricia was silent for a moment. The hatchlings. Yes, ma'am. Briggs, you need to get those creatures out of the colony right now, before those adults decide to come get them by force. Owen looked at Ash and Cinder. They were still calling to the adults, their voices desperate and pleading. The adults called back, circling tighter. This was it. The moment where he could fix everything. Return the hatchlings to their actual parents. Let them go back to their own species where they belonged. The smart choice. The safe choice. Ash turned away from the window and looked at him. Cinder did the same. Their amber eyes held complete trust. They thought he would protect them, keep them safe, because that was what parents did. I am bringing them outside, Owen said. Are you insane? Those adults will tear you apart. Maybe, but those hatchlings deserve to see their real family. Owen ended the call before Patricia could argue. He pulled on his thermal gear and fashioned the carrier so Ash and Cinder could ride on his chest. They climbed in without hesitation, still making those calling sounds. The walk to the exterior airlock felt longer than it should have. Every step was a chance to turn back. Choose safety. Lock the hatchlings away and let the Wildlife Bureau handle it. But Owen kept walking. The outer door opened onto a landing platform normally used for supply shuttles. Wind hit him immediately, strong enough to make him stagger. The adult dragons saw him and descended, landing on the platform's edge with enough force to crack the concrete. Up close, they were even more terrifying. Teeth like daggers, claws that dug into metal, eyes that held fierce intelligence. Owen walked forward slowly, keeping his movements calm. Ash and Cinder squirmed in the carrier, trying to reach the adults. The largest dragon, a deep red female, lowered her head and made a soft, rumbling sound. Owen carefully opened the carrier. Ash and Cinder tumbled out and ran toward the adult dragons. The red female gathered them close with her wings, checking them over with gentle touches of her snout. The other adults formed a protective circle around them. This was the moment. The adults had their young back. They would leave now, take Ash and Cinder home to their volcanic world where they belonged. But the hatchlings did not stay with the adults. After a few minutes of reunion, they ran back to Owen and climbed up his legs, scrambling to reach his shoulders. They chirped frantically, distressed by the separation. Owen tried to encourage them back toward the adults. They refused to go. The red female watched this with eyes that seemed to understand far more than they should. She stepped closer to Owen, close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from her scales. One wrong move, and she could kill him without effort. She lowered her head and touched her snout gently to Owen's forehead, a gesture that felt significant in ways he could not fully understand. Then she made a deep rumbling sound and scraped one claw across the platform surface, leaving a mark. A symbol in Scarati that Owen did not recognize, but somehow knew was important. The dragons took flight, circling once more before heading back toward the storm. But they did not take the hatchlings with them. They left them with Owen. The next 3 weeks passed in relative calm. The adult dragons did not return, and the colony gradually relaxed its security protocols. Patricia called Owen into her office twice more, but both times she just looked at him, shook her head, and told him to get back to work. Ash and Cinder grew. Not dramatically, but enough that Owen had to adjust the carrier every few days. Their wings healed slowly, the torn membranes filling in with new tissue. They started attempting short flights around his quarters, crashing into furniture and knocking over equipment with equal enthusiasm. The other colonists had mixed reactions. Some avoided Owen entirely, crossing to the other side of corridors when they saw him coming. Others were curious, asking questions about what the hatchlings ate and whether they were really as dangerous as the briefings claimed. Owen answered honestly. They ate a lot, mostly protein supplements mixed with minerals. And no, they were not dangerous unless you counted the time Cinder accidentally set his spare blanket on fire while learning to control her breath. Life found a new rhythm. Maintenance work in the mornings with Ash and Cinder helping in increasingly useful ways. Research in the evenings, learning everything he could about proper dragon care. Sleep whenever he could fit it in between everything else. Then the emergency alarm shattered the routine. Owen was running diagnostics on the Western Thermal Station when the call came through. Cave-in at Mining Section 7. Multiple workers trapped. Standard rescue equipment could not reach them due to structural instability. He ran back to the main colony, ash and cinder clinging to his shoulders. The command center was chaos when he arrived. Patricia stood at the main display, coordinating with the trapped miners through failing communications. How many? Owen asked. 6. They have air for maybe 4 hours if the pocket holds. Problem is the tunnel. 3 separate collapse points. We try to dig through, and the whole thing comes down. Owen studied the schematics. The collapsed sections were thick with ice and rock. Even the heavy excavation equipment would take days to cut through safely. Days the trapped miners did not have. What about going over? Through the ice field above? Too unstable. The weight of equipment would trigger more collapses. Owen kept staring at the display, trying to find an answer that did not exist. That was when he heard it. The same rumbling calls from 3 weeks ago. Everyone in the command center went silent. Patricia pulled up the exterior feeds. Adult karate dragons circled the colony again. 5 of them, including the red female who had marked the platform. Not now, Patricia muttered. We do not have time for this. But Owen was thinking. Dragons could fly. Dragons could generate intense heat. Dragons were strong enough to move massive objects without machinery. I need to go outside, he said. Absolutely not. We are in the middle of a rescue operation. I know. That is why I need to go outside. Patricia looked at him like he had lost his mind. Maybe he had. But Owen was already moving toward the airlock. Ash and Cinder made excited chirping sounds as they recognized the adult calls. The platform was freezing when Owen emerged. The red female landed immediately, folding her wings and lowering her head to his level. The other dragons remained airborne, watching. Owen had no idea if this would work. No idea if the dragon would even understand. But he had to try. He pulled up the schematic on his datapad and showed it to the red female. She tilted her head, studying the display. Owen pointed to the collapse points, then mimicked digging. Pointed to the ice, mimicked heat. He felt ridiculous trying to communicate life and death situations through gestures, but he had no other option. The dragon made a low sound and turned to the others. They communicated in ways Owen could not follow. Sounds and movements that clearly meant something to them. Then the red female looked back at Owen and dipped her head once. Agreement point 20 minutes later. Owen stood at the collapse site with 5 adult dragons and half the colony watching from safe distance. Patricia had authorized it after Owen explained the plan. Authorized it or given up trying to stop him. He was not sure which. The dragons worked with precision that surprised everyone. 2 of them used controlled bursts of flame to melt ice without destabilizing the surrounding rock. 2 more used their strength to carefully move debris, testing each piece before removing it. The red female coordinated everything, her calls directing the others with clear authority. Owen worked alongside them, monitoring structural integrity and calling out warnings when sensors detected dangerous shifts. Ash and Cinder stayed on his shoulders, occasionally making small calls that the adults seemed to acknowledge. 3 hours of careful excavation. The dragons never rushed, never made mistakes. They worked like they had done this before, though Owen could not imagine when or why they would have. Finally, the last barrier fell away. 6 miners stumbled out of the darkness, choking on dust but alive. Medical teams rushed forward while the dragons pulled back, giving humans room to work. Patricia arrived with water and emergency supplies. She looked at the dragons, then at Owen, then back at the dragons. Did they just save 6 lives? Yes, ma'am. Why? Owen thought about the mark on the platform. The gesture the red female had made weeks ago. I think we owed them one. Now, they returned the favor. The red female approached again. She touched her snout to Owen's forehead, same as before. Then she did the same to each of the rescued miners, marking them somehow, acknowledging them. The dragons took flight as medical shuttles arrived to transport the miners. Owen watched them disappear into the clouds, Ash and Cinder calling goodbye until the adults were out of sight. Patricia stood next to him. This changes things, Briggs. Yes, ma'am. I mean, it really changes things. We need to talk about establishing formal protocols. Communication methods. Safety procedures for cross-species cooperation. Owen nodded. We probably should. But first, get those hatchlings inside before they freeze. And Briggs. Yes, ma'am. Good work today. News traveled fast through the galactic community. 6 human miners rescued by Scarati dragons was not the kind of story that stayed quiet. Within a week, Owen had received communication requests from 3 different research institutions, 2 news organizations, and 1 very confused xenobiologist who insisted the entire thing must be a hoax. Patricia handled most of it, deflecting the attention while the colony adjusted to its new reality. But she could not deflect everything. Some things required Owen's direct involvement, like the arrival of Counselor David Wright from the Galactic Conservation Authority. Owen met him in a landing bay, Ash and Cinder riding in their usual carrier. The counselor was a thin man with gray hair and an expression that suggested he had seen everything and was not impressed by any of it. Engineer Briggs, I am here to evaluate the situation and determine appropriate next steps. Understood. What do you need from me? Wright pulled out a datapad covered in forms and official seals. Walk me through it. Start from the beginning. How did you acquire 2 Scarati hatchlings? Owen explained. The storm, the frozen hatchlings, the decision to bring them inside. Wright took notes, but his expression never changed. You understand, this violated multiple contamination protocols. Yes, and you proceeded anyway. They would have died. Wright looked at Ash and Cinder. They stared back at him with bright, curious eyes. Cinder chirped once, a friendly greeting. The rescue operation. The adult dragons. Tell me about that. Owen walked right through the mine collapse and the coordination with the adult Scarati. Wright's notes got longer. His frown got deeper. This is unprecedented, Wright said finally. Scarati are classified as dangerous predators. Category 5 threats. There are standing orders in some sectors to eliminate them on site. They saved 6 lives. One incident does not establish a pattern of behavior. Then let us establish one. Wright looked up from his datapad. Explain. Keep the current arrangement. Let Ash and Cinder stay with me. Let the adults visit when they want. Document everything. Build a real understanding of their species instead of just classifying them as threats. That would require official approval. Oversight committees. Safety reviews. So do it. Wright was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled. Small but genuine. You know, Briggs, you remind me why I took this job. 30 years of paperwork made me forget sometimes. Is that a yes? That is a maybe. I need to see more. Can you arrange another meeting with the adult dragons? Owen looked at Ash and Cinder. We can try. It took 2 days for the adults to return. They arrived at dawn, circling the colony in their familiar pattern. Owen brought Wright to the landing platform, along with Patricia and a handful of other observers. The red female landed first. She studied Wright with eyes that seemed to measure his worth. Then she looked at Owen and made a questioning rumble. Owen touched Ash and Cinder, then gestured to Wright, trying to communicate that this human was important, that he needed to understand. The red female stepped closer to Wright. He held his ground, though Owen could see his hands shaking slightly. Smart man. Fear was appropriate when facing something that could kill you in seconds, but the dragon did not attack. She lowered her head and made a soft sound, almost gentle. Wright carefully reached out and touched her scales. She allowed it. Remarkable, Wright whispered. The intelligence in those eyes. We classified these beings as animals. They are not animals, Owen said. They're people, just different from us. Over the next hour, the dragons demonstrated their capabilities. Precision fire control. Complex problem solving when Owen presented them with a mechanical puzzle. Communication through a combination of sounds and gestures that clearly followed grammatical rules. Wright documented everything. When the dragons finally left, he looked shaken. I need to make some calls, he said. What you have here, Briggs? This could change policy across dozens of sectors. Will it? If I have anything to say about it, yes. But it will take time. Bureaucracy moves slowly, especially when challenging established classifications. How much time? Months. Maybe years. Can you maintain this arrangement that long? Owen looked at Ash and Cinder. They had grown again, now the size of large dogs. Their wings were fully healed, and they could fly short distances without crashing into things. They played with each other on the platform, chasing and tumbling like any young creatures learning their limits. "They're not going anywhere," Owen said. "And neither am I." Wright left that afternoon with promises to push for formal recognition of Scarati intelligence and rights. Patricia seemed cautiously optimistic about the whole thing. 2 weeks later, the first visiting researchers arrived. They wanted to study dragon communication, dragon social structure, dragon cognitive abilities. Owen allowed it on the condition that they treated Ash and Cinder with respect and did not interfere with his work. Most of them followed the rules. A few did not, and found themselves escorted off the colony by very large adult dragons who did not appreciate strangers bothering their young. The mining operations continued. Owen maintained the thermal stations. Ash and Cinder helped more each day, their natural affinity for heat and energy making them better at diagnostics than most of his equipment. Night, they curled up in their blankets while Owen read reports about policy changes and classification reviews. The galactic community was slowly, grudgingly, starting to accept that maybe humans had found something important here, that a different way of seeing other species. Not as threats to be eliminated or resources to be exploited, just as neighbors trying to survive in a harsh universe. Ash poked her head out of the blankets and yawned. Cinder made a sleepy rumbling sound. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, more opportunities to prove that cooperation beat conflict. But tonight, Owen let himself feel something close to satisfaction. He had wrapped 2 freezing hatchlings in warmth and kept working. Everything else followed from that one simple choice. 8 months transformed everything in ways Owen had not predicted. The colony on Arctis 7 became something else entirely. Not just a mining operation anymore, but the first recognized cross-species cooperation zone in the sector. Official designation came through 3 months after Wright's visit. Scarati were reclassified from Category 5 threats to Category 2 protected intelligent species. Not quite full citizenship rights, but close enough that killing them was now murder instead of pest control. Other colonies wanted to know how it worked. Delegations arrived weekly, asking questions and taking notes. Owen answered what he could, but mostly he just let them watch. The morning routine showed them more than words ever could. Owen walked through the thermal stations with Ash and Cinder, who were now large enough to fly beside him instead of riding in carriers. 3 younger dragons follow behind, hatchlings brought by their parents to learn from the proven safe human. The youngsters were curious about everything. They investigated equipment, tested Owen's tools with gentle claws, and asked questions in the clicking, chirping language Owen was slowly starting to understand. Ash and Cinder played translator, though half the time they just demonstrated what Owen needed instead of explaining. Today's task involved replacing a burned-out transformer in the northern station. Owen set up his work area while the young dragons watched. One of them, a small green female, barely bigger than Ash had been when he found her, shivered despite the heated space. Owen pulled a thermal blanket from his pack and draped it over her shoulders without thinking. The young dragon chirped in surprise, then settled into the warmth with a contented rumble. Her parents, watching from the doorway, made sounds Owen recognized as approval, just like that. Kindness across species barriers. The thing that started everything was still the thing that mattered most. The transformer replacement took 2 hours. The young dragons helped by holding tools and monitoring heat signatures. One of them spotted a stress fracture in a conduit that Owen's scanner had missed. Good eyes. Better than human technology in some ways. Work finished. Owen headed back toward the main colony. The dragon families flew overhead, circling in patterns that had become familiar. Protective. Friendly. Home. Patricia met him at the entrance with news. Another colony wants to establish a program. Out near the Titan Belt. They have a native species there. Big insect-like creatures. Usually aggressive, but one of their engineers thinks cooperation might be possible. Did they ask for advice? They asked for you. Want you to consult on establishing first contact protocols. Owen considered it. Ash and Cinder landed beside him, listening. They had gotten good at understanding when conversations involved them. Tell them, I can send documentation, best practices, safety guidelines. But I'm staying here. I figured you would say that. Already sent them the standard package. More delegations. More colonies trying the human approach of cooperation over elimination. Some would fail. Different species, different circumstances. But some would succeed, and that mattered. The afternoon brought unexpected visitors. 3 commercial ships requesting permission to land. Owen watched from the command center as Patricia handled the communications. This is the merchant vessel Star Runner requesting docking clearance. We have cargo for delivery. What kind of cargo? Patricia asked. Specialty items. Heat-resistant fabrics, scaled-up furniture, dietary supplements formulated for Scarati biology. Your colony placed orders. Patricia looked at Owen. He shrugged. Ash and Cinder are still growing. Regular supplies do not fit them anymore. You ordered custom furniture for dragons. They kept breaking the regular furniture. Patricia laughed. Actual genuine laughter. 8 months ago, she would have written him up for unauthorized purchases. Now, she just approved the delivery and went back to work. The galaxy was changing. Slowly, in small ways, but changing. Evening found Owen in his quarters, now significantly larger after Patricia authorized an expansion. Ash and Cinder had their own sleeping area, though they still preferred to pile blankets near Owen's bed. The young dragons from today's training had gone home with their parents, but they would be back tomorrow. Owen sat at his terminal, reviewing reports from other colonies. Success stories and failures. Learning curves and breakthrough moments. Every report added to the growing body of knowledge about cross-species cooperation that a message came through from right at the Conservation Authority. Policy changes were moving forward. Formal recognition protocols for intelligent non-human species. Legal protections. Rights and responsibilities. The thing that started with 2 freezing hatchlings on a frozen moon was spreading across the galaxy. Owen closed the terminal and looked at Ash and Cinder. They were playing with a heat puzzle he had built, using their fire breath to activate different sections in sequence. Smart enough to solve problems. Smart enough to teach others. Smart enough to be people in every way that mattered. A soft scratching at the door. Owen opened it to find the green youngster from this morning. She chirped nervously, holding a thermal blanket in her claws. Owen stepped aside and let her in. She scurried to the sleeping area and settled down next to Cinder, who welcomed her with a friendly rumble. Her parents appeared in the doorway, making questioning sounds. She can stay if she wants. Owen said they understood. Dragons and humans had developed enough shared language for simple communication. The parents flew off, trusting Owen the same way the red female had trusted him months ago. 3 dragons in his quarters now. Probably would be more eventually. Ash and Cinder were already talking about starting their own training program for even younger hatchlings. Owen pulled out his work schedule for tomorrow. For stations needed maintenance. 2 visiting researchers wanted interviews. 1 delegation from a distant colony needed a tour of the cooperation protocols in action. Busy day ahead. Same as always. He set an alarm and climbed into bed. Ash, Cinder, and the green youngster were already asleep, radiating warmth that made the room comfortable without needing extra heating. Outside, dragons circled the colony in protective patterns. Inside, humans and dragons worked together on plans for tomorrow. The galaxy was figuring out that different did not mean dangerous. That cooperation beat conflict. That sometimes the biggest changes started with the smallest acts of kindness. Owen closed his eyes. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to prove that warmth and work could build bridges between any species willing to try. But tonight, everyone slept safe and warm. And that was enough.